"You're just a ghost in this house, Mom. You float around doing nothing. Nobody notices when you're here, or when you're not." That's what my son Daniel said, one hand on my shoulder, the other reaching for my dinner plate before I'd even finished. His wife chuckled. My granddaughter looked down at her phone. I built that home brick by brick with my husband's last paycheck. Now, I was being erased in it. That night I didn't cry. I listened. I watched. And I made a promise to myself. If I'm just a ghost, then ghosts can vanish. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. Before the silence, there was laughter. Before I was a ghost, I was a mother, a real one. The kind who knew which blanket Daniel liked best, who could make him smile with just a warm cookie and a humming song from the old record player. I was 29 when George died. He left for work like he always did. Kissed me on the forehead, kissed baby Daniel on the cheek, and walked out the door humming some country tune. I remember the silence that followed the phone call that day. The factory explosion, the way they said "we're sorry." And nothing after that made much sense. But I didn't crumble. I couldn't. Daniel was only 4. He needed me. And if I let myself fall apart, we'd both be lost. So I wiped my tears, tied my apron, and went to work. 2 jobs, one at the diner in the mornings, one cleaning offices in the evenings. I barely slept. My hands ached from scrubbing, my knees popped when I bent, and my eyes stung from the bleach. But I came home every night and held my boy close, even if he was already asleep. Daniel was my world. He was a sweet boy. Thoughtful. Soft-hearted. He used to bring me dandelions from the schoolyard and whisper, "For you, Mommy." I still have one of those pressed between the pages of my Bible. We didn't have much, but what we had we treasured. His first tricycle was from a second-hand store. I repainted it red and added a tiny bell I found at a garage sale. You'd think it was made of gold the way he smiled when he rode it down the driveway. And the house? Oh, the house. It wasn't much when I bought it. Just 2 bedrooms and a creaky porch. But it was ours. George had a small life insurance policy, and I used every cent wisely. I patched the roof myself, with some help from Mr. Hanley next door. Painted the walls in warm colors. Hung up old photos, lace curtains, shelves filled with cookbooks and knickknacks. That house was full of life. Daniel's laughter bounced off those walls. His footsteps pounded up and down the stairs when he was pretending to be a superhero. On cold nights, we'd sit by the heater and read picture books under a blanket. Every Christmas, I made hot cocoa with cinnamon and let him open one gift on Christmas Eve, just one. He always picked the softest package, hoping it wasn't socks, even though it usually was. Those were the good years. Not because everything was perfect, but because love made the hard parts bearable. I remember one night vividly. Daniel was 9, and I had just come home from a long shift. My back ached so bad I could barely stand. I sat on the couch, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes. When I opened them, he was standing in front of me with a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," he said. It was a drawing of our house. Crooked windows, funny little chimney, and a stick figure of me with a big smile. Underneath, in his clumsy handwriting, it said, "Best Mom. My hero." Cried right there. He got scared, but I pulled him into my arms and told him they were happy tears. He used to say things like, "I'm going to take care of you when you're old, and you'll live with me forever." Funny how time twists promises. There were warning signs, maybe. Small ones I ignored. As he grew into a teenager, he started to pull away. Not in a cruel way, just the usual stubbornness boys get. But he still kissed my cheek before bed, still helped carry the groceries, still asked me for advice when he got his first crush. I taught him how to iron his shirts, how to budget a paycheck, how to treat people with kindness. I thought I was raising a good man, and for a long time I believed I had. He went to college, the first in our family to do so. I cried like a baby when we dropped him off. He promised to call every Sunday, and for a while he did. Then Amanda came along. They met in his 3rd year. I didn't know much about her at first, just that she was pretty, studying business and had a sharp way of speaking. But Daniel seemed happy, so I welcomed her with open arms. I still remember the first time they visited together. I made my famous roast chicken and lemon pie. Amanda took one bite and said, "It's a bit old-fashioned, but okay." I laughed. I thought she was joking. Daniel didn't laugh. He just looked at his plate. It was small. Just a moment. But now looking back, maybe that's when the warmth started to dim. I didn't notice how fast things were changing. The way they sat closer together, whispering while I cleaned up. How she'd roll her eyes when I talked about George. How Daniel stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Maf in that distant, polite tone. I pushed the feelings down. Told myself I was imagining things. That I was getting old and sensitive. But the house remembered. Every photo on the wall held a story. Every creak in the floorboard whispered a memory. George's old coat still hung in the back closet. Daniel's growth marks were etched in the kitchen doorway. I didn't realize I was becoming a relic. Just another antique in the place I built with my own hands. Looking back now, I wonder if I held on too tightly. If my love made me blind. But no. Love isn't the problem. Love is never the problem. It's what people do with it that turns sweet things bitter. It didn't happen overnight. That's the thing about change. It seeps in like water under a door. Quiet, uninvited, and destructive in slow motion. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe Amanda had a sharper tongue than I was used to. Not everyone's raised on manners and Sunday supper. The first time I really noticed something shift, it was over the thermostat. Amanda had just moved in after the wedding. I'd made the house ready, put fresh sheets in the guest room, cleared space in the closet, even packed away some of George's old books to make room. I was trying. One morning I walked into the living room and it felt like a meat locker. I turned the thermostat back up to a modest 70. Minutes later, Amanda came downstairs, glanced at it and said, "Oh, we don't like it that warm." She turned it back down to 62. I said nothing. It wasn't worth the argument, I told myself. It was just a preference. I could wear a sweater. But that was the first crack. Soon I noticed little things. Amanda started calling me Marjorie instead of Mom. The first time she did it, she laughed and said, "I just think it's less confusing that way." Confusing for who? Daniel didn't correct her. He just nodded, distracted by his phone. Then it was the dinners. I used to cook every night. It was my love language, I guess. George used to say my pot roast could fix any bad day. Daniel grew up on casseroles, stews, fresh bread. But now Amanda would grab something on the way, or order food before I could even finish prepping. One evening, I was halfway through baking a meatloaf when she walked in with sushi takeout. "Oh, sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "We didn't know you were cooking again." Daniel mumbled, "We'll eat it tomorrow." The meatloaf sat untouched. I noticed Daniel started coming home later from work. He said it was stress. Amanda said he needed space. I stayed quiet. There was a day I came home from church, and they were having wine on the patio. My chair, the old rocking one George bought me, wasn't there. "Where's my chair?" I asked. Amanda sipped her drink and said, "Oh, we put it in the garage." It didn't really match the vibe. Didn't match the vibe. That chair had grooves in the arms from where George's hands used to rest. I nursed Daniel in that chair. I read my Bible there every morning. But now it was clutter. I walked into the garage later that evening. The chair was tucked behind boxes, dust settling on its arms like grief. I brought it back in. Didn't ask permission. Just set it by the window where it belonged. The next day it was gone again. That time I didn't say a word. Daniel had changed too. He used to ask me about my day. We'd sit at the kitchen table after dinner and talk about politics, books, the neighbors. He used to care. Now he sat with his phone half listening. When I asked how work was, he'd shrug. "Fine." When I mentioned church, he said, "You still go." He wasn't mean. He was just distant. And I kept shrinking. Amanda began inviting her friends over more often. They were loud, brash, full of wine and laughter that didn't reach me. I'd sit upstairs in my room, listening to them talk about vacations and investments and old people who don't know when to let go. I don't know if they meant me, but I felt it in my bones. One afternoon, I overheard Amanda on the phone in the kitchen. I was in the hallway, close enough to hear, not close enough to be seen. "Yeah, she's still here. We thought she'd be out by now, but it's taking longer than expected. Out. Like trash on a pickup schedule." She laughed. "Daniel's too soft." I told him if we're going to modernize the house, she can't be hovering around. It's weird. I felt my throat tighten. I stepped back quietly and went to my room. I stared at the ceiling for a long time that night. I thought of George, how he would have handled this. He was the steady one, the protector. Me? I was just tired. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I told myself maybe they were stressed. Maybe I needed to adjust. Maybe this was just what it looked like to get old. But it wasn't just stress. One day, Daniel came home from work and asked if I could spot them for a few bills. Just for a month. Things were tight. Of course I said yes. A month turned into 3. Then Amanda suggested I stop paying for certain extras, like my newspaper subscription or my prescription foot cream. You don't really need it, do you? She said, smiling like she was helping. They began managing my mail. We'll sort it for you, Marjorie. Don't worry. At first it was just the gas bill and flyers. Then I noticed some of my bank statements were missing. Daniel brushed it off. They're digital now, Ma. You probably just didn't get one this time. I nodded. But I started keeping copies. Quietly. There's a moment when love starts to feel like a transaction. You start to wonder if you're being kind. Or just being used. And deep down, even though I wasn't ready to admit it, I knew. They weren't just drifting away. They were pushing me out. It was Amanda's birthday. A Saturday in late spring. The kind of day when the lilacs bloom and the air smells like possibility. I had baked a lemon chiffon cake the night before. Her favorite, or so I thought. I used George's old mixer, the one that rattled and shook but still did the job. I even picked some flowers from the back garden and arranged them in a vase for the dining table. I was excited. Foolishly, maybe. But it felt like a chance to bridge something. To feel included. By 11 a.m., guests started arriving. Amanda's friends mostly. Faces I didn't know, laughter that didn't involve me. I stood near the kitchen, smoothing my skirt, smiling when someone made eye contact. Amanda swept in wearing a new dress and heels too high for comfort. She kissed Daniel's cheek and tossed her purse onto the counter, nearly knocking over the vase I had placed. Oh, she said, noticing it. Cute. She didn't mention the cake. Didn't ask who made it. I hovered near the sink, unsure where to be. There was no chair pulled out for me at the table. No one offered. So I stayed near the kitchen island, pouring lemonade, wiping non-existent crumbs, waiting for someone to need something. They never did. Around noon I heard Amanda laugh. Loud. Sharp. She still thinks this is her house, she said to a woman with bleached curls. I told Daniel we have to move forward. Modernize. She clutters every corner with memories. The woman laughed. Well, you're a saint for letting her stay. Letting me stay. I stood still. Completely still. My hands around a glass I hadn't yet filled. Daniel was nearby. I looked at him. He was sipping something and staring at the floor. He didn't say a word. Didn't correct her. Didn't defend me. Didn't even glance in my direction. Something in me cracked. Quietly, like an old cup finally giving way under pressure. Later I brought out the cake. Amanda blinked, surprised. You made this? She asked, sounding almost amused. I nodded, placing it gently on the table. She leaned closer, whispered to her friend. Lemon again. Every year. They laughed. I looked at Daniel again. He smiled at her. That night, after everyone left and the house was quiet, I went to the kitchen to clean up. The cake was mostly untouched. Someone had shoved it to the side to make room for store-bought cupcakes. As I gathered plates, I noticed something in the trash. My teacup. The one with tiny blue flowers around the rim, chipped just slightly from years of use. George had bought it for me on our first anniversary. I fished it out, confused, hoping it was a mistake. Amanda walked in, barefoot, rubbing her temples. Oh, she said, seeing the cup. Yeah, it broke. Looked kind of old anyway. Then she turned and walked away. I stood there, holding it in both hands, heart thudding like I was 16 and lost. It wasn't just a cup. It was the last gift George ever gave me. He handed it to me with a shy smile and said, For my delicate flower. I'd sipped tea from it every morning since. Through Daniel's fevers, through empty birthdays, through good news and bad. And now it sat, cracked and discarded like I didn't matter. Like he didn't matter. The next morning I didn't come down for breakfast. I stayed in my room, holding that broken teacup and staring out the window. No one came to check on me. By afternoon I heard them downstairs talking about paint samples. Amanda said, We'll finally make this place feel like ours. Ours, Daniel replied. Maybe we should just gut the whole kitchen. Start fresh. Start fresh. No mention of me. Of the woman who scrubbed those floors until her knees cracked. Who hand-stitched the curtains. Who lined every drawer with shelf paper printed in sunflowers. The next time I walked through the living room, I noticed the photo wall had changed. The picture of George in his overalls smiling with Daniel on his shoulders? Gone. In its place, a canvas print of a generic beach sunset. No explanation. No apology. They were removing me from the house piece by piece. Not just my things. Me. I stopped speaking much after that. What was the point? Words weren't landing anywhere anymore. I cooked less. Ate upstairs. Cleaned only my own space. Once Daniel asked if everything was okay. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Do you really want to know?" He shrugged. "If it's important." It was like talking through glass. That night I opened the box under my bed. Inside, old bank records, the original deed to the house, George's will, and a small leather notebook where I'd scribbled every bill payment, repair, and update for over 30 years. Proof that I mattered. That this house was more mine than theirs. I ran my fingers across George's signature. He'd written, "To Marjorie for everything. Keep this place full of love." And that's when it hit me. They weren't just disrespecting me. They were erasing him too. That hurt more than anything. Because George gave everything for this house. For Daniel. And Daniel was letting it all rot. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone went to bed. I looked around the room that once held birthday candles, spilled juice, and late-night tears. Now it felt like a museum. Cold. Sanitized. Silent. And in that silence I made a quiet vow. If they wanted me gone, they'd get their wish. But not how they expected. I was walking past the home office when I heard Amanda say it. Her voice was low, sharp, the kind of whisper that still manages to slice through doors if you're meant to hear it. "I've already spoken with the realtor, Daniel," she said. "Once your mother's out, we can list within the month." I froze. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just on my way to the laundry room. But now I stood still as stone, heart-pounding, laundry basket clutched to my chest like a shield. "She won't go easily," Daniel replied. His voice didn't sound angry or even hesitant. Just tired. "She thinks this house belongs to her." Amanda scoffed. "Well, technically it doesn't anymore. We've done everything except change the name on the deed." I couldn't breathe. I leaned against the wall, legs shaking. The hallway spun. They were planning to sell the house. My home. George's home. The place where Daniel had taken his first steps, broken his first tooth, whispered his first prayer. I waited until I heard footsteps going the other way. Then I crept into the office. The computer was still on. Amanda had left her email open. There it was. A message thread with a realtor. Pictures of my kitchen, my bedroom. Listing price suggestions. A rough estimate of what they'd get if it sold fast. At the bottom, one line made my stomach turn. Property is occupied, but transition should be easy. Elderly relative, looking into care facilities now. Elderly relative. Not even mom. Not even Marjorie. Just an obstacle. I clicked through Amanda's emails. Another one popped up, this one from a facility across town. An assisted living center. Attached was a glossy brochure. Peacefield Gardens, because they deserve the best. It was beautiful. Bright rooms, smiling nurses, neat little meals on plastic trays. But I could see it for what it was. A holding cell with better wallpaper. She'd already booked a tour. Already spoken with the admissions office. Already filled out a preliminary application in my name. The form was signed. Sloppily. My name forged in her swirling cursive. My chest burned. My hands trembled. I backed away from the desk, afraid I might scream. I didn't. I just stood there watching the screensaver flicker on. Daniel's wedding photo, Amanda in her white dress, him beaming beside her. And I thought, this is the woman you married. The one you trust more than the mother who gave you everything? That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my room wrapped in George's old cardigan, staring at nothing. Memories came flooding back. The night George and I moved in, eating takeout on the floor, laughing over a leaky faucet. Daniel's first day of school. How he clung to my skirt, tears in his eyes. The time he got the flu and I stayed up for 2 nights straight, cooling his forehead with wet cloths. Had it all meant nothing? I opened the top drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a faded photograph, me, George, and a toddler-aged Daniel sitting on the porch. The photo was creased, soft around the edges from years of handling. George had written on the back in blue pen, "Our castle. Keep it strong." They were trying to take it. The next morning I started moving differently. I didn't complain about the cold coffee. I didn't flinch when Amanda slammed a cabinet. I smiled. I nodded. But I started keeping notes. I took pictures of everything, my belongings, the house, even the documents I found. I started watching what they touched, what they moved, what they whispered about. They thought I was fading. But I was waking up. A few days later, Amanda brought home a folder from the nursing home. She set it down casually on the counter and said, "Just something to look at." I opened it in front of her. Smiled politely. "It looks lovely," I said. She blinked, surprised. "Really?" I nodded. "I especially like the part where you forged my name." Her smile cracked for just a second. "Excuse me." I held up the form with her signature. My name scribbled underneath in ink that didn't match mine. She opened her mouth, closed it. Daniel walked in then, holding his phone, eyes darting between us. "What's going on?" he asked. "Nothing," Amanda said quickly. "We were just going over options." I turned to him, stared hard. "Is that what you think this is, Daniel? Options?" He didn't answer. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That night I sat alone in the living room. The place was quiet again, and I realized how loud the house used to be. George humming while fixing things, Daniel running around barefoot, me yelling after spilled juice or forgotten shoes. Now it was all whispers, cold intentions. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. I walked down to the basement and opened the old filing cabinet George and I used to keep. Everything was there. The original deed, tax documents, George's letters, and tucked at the back, a letter from George to Daniel. I'd forgotten about it. He wrote it just before the accident, something to open when he turned 18. But I never gave it to him. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid it would make him miss his father too much. Or maybe I thought he wasn't ready. I opened it. Just a few lines. George's blocky handwriting. "Son, take care of your mother. Protect her like I would have. The house is hers. Everything is. Never forget who gave you everything." I clutched that letter like it was air. It was time to stop hoping. Time to start preparing. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I waited until Daniel was alone. Amanda had gone out for a girls' night, something she did more often lately, dressing up like a TV actress, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and entitlement. Daniel was in the kitchen, hunched over a bowl of cereal. He looked tired, worn down, older than his 38 years. I stood quietly in the doorway, watching him eat, wondering how the sweet boy who once held my hand at the fair had become this distracted stranger. "I want to talk," I said. He looked up, startled. "Sure. About what?" I walked in and sat across from him, laying a folder gently on the table. Inside were printed emails from Amanda's account, the forged nursing home forms, and the letter George wrote before he died. Daniel didn't touch it. "What is this?" he asked, though I could tell he already knew. "You tell me," I said. "Because it looks like my son and his wife have been planning to take the house behind my back." He blinked. "It's not like that, Ma." "Then explain it to me. Help me understand why you were going to sell my home without telling me. Why Amanda filled out forms in my name. Why you've been changing this house one piece at a time like I was never here." He swallowed. I could see his Adam's apple jump. His hand twitched on the spoon. "Amanda just wants what's best for everyone. She thinks you'd be happier with some care." I leaned forward. "Do I look like I need care, Daniel?" Silence. "I may be old, but I'm not helpless. And I'm certainly not stupid." He looked away. "I never signed anything," I said quietly. "I still have the deed. I know what she's been telling the realtor. And I know what she's been saying about me when she thinks I can't hear." He finally met my eyes. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," I said, my voice calm, sharp. "It's betrayal." That word hung in the air. Heavy. True. He sighed long and low. "It's just we're struggling. Money's tight. Amanda thought if we sold and got something smaller we could. You could take what I built, I interrupted. What your father and I sacrificed for. You wanted to strip it of everything it stood for, and leave me to rot in some place with plastic plants and scheduled meal times. His face flushed. It wasn't like that. Then why didn't you talk to me? I didn't know how. That hurt more than all the scheming. You used to tell me everything, I whispered. When you had a bad dream. When your bike broke. When Amanda first kissed you. You used to sit on that very floor, crying into my lap. And now you can't even tell me you're unhappy. He rubbed his face. I don't know how we got here. I stood. I do. You stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a burden. He didn't deny it. Just stared at his cereal, soggy and forgotten. That night I didn't cry. I felt something else blooming inside, something fierce, focused. Not rage exactly. Not grief either. Something sharper. I pulled out my notebook and started listing everything. The items I'd need, the names of lawyers, the dates I'd overheard things. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was my own witness. The next day, I visited Mrs. Redford, my neighbor of 20 years. She made us tea and sat across from me in her robe and slippers. They're planning something, I told her. And I think I need help. She nodded like she'd been expecting this. I've seen Amanda watching the house across the street, she said. Told the mailman last week they were going to upgrade soon. I didn't like the way she said it. I exhaled, the confirmation oddly soothing. I'm not crazy, I whispered. No, she said. You're just finally seeing things clearly. She gave me the number of a lawyer her niece used during a messy property dispute. He's good, she said. And discreet. I took it, folded it into my palm like a secret weapon. The next few days were quiet. Amanda acted like nothing had happened. She smiled, complimented my cardigan, even asked if I needed anything from the store. It was all fake. I saw through it now. Every kind word was a thread in her web. Daniel kept his distance. I could see the guilt in him, but not enough of it. He didn't apologize. He didn't defend me. He just existed beside me like a man hoping things would blow over. They wouldn't. One afternoon, Amanda walked in while I was folding laundry. Daniel said you two had a talk, she said, her tone sweet but eyes cold. We did. She leaned against the doorframe. I just want what's best for this family. No, I said softly, you want control. And you thought I wouldn't fight back. She stiffened like I'd slapped her. I've lived in this house longer than you've been alive, Amanda. I've buried a husband, raised a son, and survived things you couldn't imagine. Don't mistake my silence for weakness. Her mouth opened then closed. I turned back to my laundry. You should enjoy this while it lasts. That night I called the lawyer. His voice was steady, patient. I explained everything quietly, carefully. He listened, asked questions, took notes. By the end of the call, I had an appointment and a plan. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The law office was tucked between a bakery and an old bookstore. The kind of building with ivy curling up the brick and a bell that jingled softly when I opened the door. It smelled faintly of leather, paper, and dust like permanence. His name was Mr. Harland, and he looked to be around Daniel's age. Clean suit, kind eyes, and hands that fidgeted with a paperclip while I spoke. I told him everything. Not just about the forged documents in the house, but about the silences, the stares, the feeling of being quietly erased by people I once swaddled in blankets and fed with trembling hands. He listened. No interruptions, no condescension. Just nodded, jotted notes, and every so often, met my eyes with something like respect. You have full legal ownership, he said after a pause. We can make sure that's protected. I swallowed. And the will. He folded his hands. You can leave your estate to whoever you choose. You're not obligated to your son or daughter-in-law. The words felt heavier than I expected. I had pictured this moment so many times, standing firm, rewriting my will, casting them out with one signature. But now that it was real, it stung. Daniel was my baby, my only child. I'd carried him when I was barely strong enough to stand, nursed him through fevers, saved every dollar to buy him shoes that fit. And yet here I was, planning a future where he would get nothing. I don't want them to fight over it, I murmured. They might try to contest it. Mr. Harland admitted. But there are ways to protect your wishes. He slid a folder across the desk, already prepared. We can include a no contest clause. If anyone challenges the will, they forfeit everything. It'll stand up in court. I nodded slowly. Good. And if that happens, I want the house and the rest of the estate to go somewhere meaningful. Somewhere safe. Any ideas? I thought of George. Of his voice reading the paper out loud in the mornings. His medals in the bottom drawer. His deep respect for service, country, and the forgotten men who sat alone in diners with hollow eyes. Yes, I said. If my will is challenged, everything should go to veterans' housing. There's a place downstate building transitional homes. I'll get the name. He smiled gently. That's a powerful statement, Mrs. Thompson. It's not a statement, I said. It's justice. We went over every detail, the house, the savings, the old life insurance policy. I left nothing out. No room for doubt. No inch for manipulation. When it was time to sign, my hands trembled a little. Not with weakness, with weight. Mr. Harland slid the pen toward me. You're sure? He asked. I looked at him. No mother should ever have to do this, I whispered. But I'm not just a mother anymore. I'm a woman. And I'm not letting them erase me. I signed. The pen scratched quietly against the paper, but to me it sounded like thunder. Afterwards, he handed me a copy of the documents in a neat blue folder. I clutched it tight, pressing it to my chest as I walked out the door. The sun was high by then, warm on my face. For the first time in months I felt in control. Not like a ghost drifting through my own memories, but a person, still here, still standing. I walked to the bakery next door and bought myself a lemon tart. George always loved lemon. Said it reminded him of summer. I sat on a bench outside and ate it slowly, watching people pass by. The world was still turning. Life went on. And I was still part of it. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone where I'd been. Amanda was in the living room scrolling on her phone. Daniel wasn't home. She glanced at me. Have fun at the doctor? I smiled. Actually, I feel better than I have in years. She raised an eyebrow, clearly suspicious. But she said nothing. I walked past her, folder tucked beneath my arm like a secret weapon. Upstairs, I placed the will inside the filing cabinet, next to George's letter, the deed, and my notebook. Then I locked it. That night, I sat in my old rocking chair by the window, sipping tea from the second-best cup I owned. The favorite was still broken. No gluing that betrayal back together. I watched the moon rise, pale and slow, and thought of what I'd done. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was clarity. Protection. Amanda had always been clever. But she mistook my kindness for weakness. She thought I wouldn't fight back. That I'd go quietly. She was wrong. This house was built on love, sweat, and sacrifice. It would not be sold out of greed. And Daniel, he had made his choice. He had watched me get pushed aside, laughed at, used. He had stood in silence while Amanda carved out her empire, and said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, can be just as sharp as words. As I rocked slowly, the old boards creaking beneath me, I whispered into the stillness. George, I've done what I had to. I protected our home. Just like you wanted. The wind picked up, rattling the window pane lightly like a nod. I closed my eyes and let it wrap around me. The house was still mine. My story wasn't over. Not yet. It was a Wednesday when I found the boxes. I'd gone into the garage to find my old sewing kit. A neighbor had torn a sleeve, and I still liked to keep my hands busy. But instead I found 3 cardboard boxes stacked neatly near the back door. Written in thick black marker on the sides. Mom's stuff, dump. Old books, donate or toss? Extra junk. Ask later? My name wasn't even on them anymore. Just a mum, like I was a burden they hadn't quite figured out how to discard. I opened one. Inside was my wedding album. George's favorite plaid shirts. A quilt I'd stitched by hand the year Daniel was born. All crammed together with paperbacks and cracked holiday decorations. The box smelled like mothballs in time. Like something already forgotten. I stood there for a long time, one hand on the album, the other clenched at my side. The silence in that garage wasn't peaceful. It was brutal. They were packing me away like I was already gone. Later that day, I heard Amanda on the phone again, cheerful and rehearsed. Yes, we'll be ready to list soon. just waiting on the last bit of paperwork. The place will look amazing once we remove the dated touches. Dated touches? Me. She was talking about me. That night, Daniel handed me a manila envelope after dinner. No preamble, no warmth. He set it on the table and said, "Amanda, and I think it's time you look this over." Inside was a full application packet for Peacefield Gardens, the nursing home. Printed on top was the phrase, "Compassionate care for those who gave everything." How ironic. I didn't touch the papers. Just looked at him, really looked at him. This man with my husband's nose and my mother's eyes, who used to leave me sticky notes that said, "I love you" in crayon. "You want me gone that badly?" I asked. His face twitched. "It's not about that. We just think it's better. You'll have your own space. Help if you need it. A community." "I have a home," I said. "I have a life." "You're alone most of the time," he replied, not meeting my eyes. I laughed. Not out of humor but disbelief. "I'm alone because you made it that way." He didn't argue. He just left the envelope on the table like a signed betrayal. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining table with every document I'd ever kept. The will, the deed, George's letter, and the bank statements they probably thought I'd forgotten to check. My savings weren't much, but they were mine. Enough to fuel what I needed to do next. I packed a small suitcase. Not because I was leaving but because I needed to be ready. I made 3 copies of everything. One for the lawyer, one for Mrs. Redford to hold in case anything happened to me, and one for myself. Then I made a call. It wasn't dramatic or angry. I just dialed the number Mr. Harland had given me for emergency filings and said, "It's time. I'm ready to move forward." The next few days passed with a strange kind of quiet. Amanda was cheerful again, too cheerful. She played music while she cleaned. Music I didn't recognize, songs with heavy bass and no melody. I noticed she'd begun measuring the walls in the guest room. She made phone calls using phrases like open concept and natural light potential. She was planning renovations before I'd even left. That Friday, Amanda had a contractor come by. He walked through the house, clipboard in hand, nodding as she pointed to walls and fixtures. She didn't introduce me. I stood in the corner of the living room while they discussed knocking down this ugly divider, which happened to be a wall George and I built together in the 80s. We'd argued over the paint color, settled on warm sage, and laughed for an hour when the ladder collapsed under him. Now it was outdated and clunky. The contractor glanced at me, uncertain. Amanda smiled and waved it off. "Oh, she's just staying temporarily. We'll have it emptied soon." Emptied. Like a storage unit. That was it. That was the moment I knew the line had been crossed. Not just hurt. Not just betrayal. This was eviction, not on paper maybe but in spirit. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was too old, too soft, too forgotten to do anything. But they had no idea what was coming. That night, I packed all the original documents, the photos, the receipts, and George's letter into a fireproof lockbox. I tucked it under my bed with the calm of a woman who's no longer afraid. I wrote a letter, not to Daniel or Amanda, but to myself. Promise. You are not invisible. You are not done. This is still your home. And you will protect it. And I signed it with my full name. Marjorie Elaine Thompson. Not mom. Not burden. Not ghost. Me. The next morning I dressed in my best navy cardigan, fixed my hair and made a pot of tea. I sat at the table with calm hands and steady eyes as Amanda buzzed around the house, too busy to notice what I was preparing. But everything was ready. Because the next time I walked into a room full of people, I wouldn't be silent. Amanda's baby shower was going to be a spectacle. She made that clear from the moment the invitations went out. Gold foil cards, personalized thank you bags, catered brunch, the works. She called it a classy affair, and said it was only for friends and people who matter. I wasn't invited. She didn't say it directly, of course. She just walked past me one morning, phone to her ear, saying, "We'll keep it small. Just important people. Don't want to clutter the space." Daniel didn't even look up from his coffee. But I had already made my plans. That morning, I got dressed in my best gray slacks and a pearl brooch George had given me on our 10th anniversary. I tucked the lockbox under my arm, documents, recordings, copies, everything. My hands didn't shake. The house was already bustling when I arrived. Balloons curled around the banister. A hired photographer posed Amanda in front of the fireplace. Daniel stood awkwardly to the side, wearing a pale blue shirt and a forced smile. I stepped through the front door without knocking. Amanda turned, blinking, the smile on her face faltering. The photographer hesitated. "Oh," she said. "Didn't know you were coming." "I live here," I replied, my voice calm, carrying. "Or did you forget?" She recovered quickly, eyes darting around the room. "Well, it's a bit crowded." "Perfect," I said, walking to the center of the room. "Then everyone can hear this." I set the lockbox on the coffee table and opened it slowly. One by one I laid out documents. The original deed, George's letter, my updated will, and a USB drive with recordings of Amanda's conversations, her calling me a relic, discussing the sale of the house, forging my name. People began to quiet. One by one, conversations died and eyes turned toward me. Amanda stepped forward. "Marjorie, this really isn't the time." I raised my hand. "No, it's exactly the time. Because for months you've been planning to erase me. Sell the house I built. Dump me in a facility like I'm an old appliance you no longer need. And you thought I'd stay quiet." Daniel stepped forward. "Ma, can we talk about this later?" "No," I said. "We'll talk now. You want to build a future on lies? Do it without me." I picked up George's letter, turned it around, and read it aloud. "Son, take care of your mother. Protect her like I would have. The house is hers. Everything is. Never forget who gave you everything." There was a long silence. Amanda's face had gone pale, then red. She turned to Daniel. "Say something." But he couldn't, because he knew it was all true. "I have a new will," I said. "Everything has been legally documented. You've both been removed. And if either of you contests it, everything goes to veterans' housing. Not a cent for either of you." Murmurs filled the room. Some of Amanda's friends looked horrified. Others looked like they couldn't wait to gossip. Amanda tried again. "You can't do this." I met her eyes, steady and cold. "You're right. I already did." Then I turned to Daniel and my voice softened just for a second. "I loved you more than anything. But love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you. You watched her mock me, isolate me, erase your father's memory. And you said nothing." He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked at the floor. That was all the answer I needed. I gathered the documents, placed them back in the box, and tucked it under my arm. As I walked toward the door, I felt all eyes on me. Not with pity, not with confusion, but with respect. Some even looked ashamed. Amanda's voice called after me. "You're not the victim here." I paused at the door, turned slightly. "No," I said. "I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor." And then I walked out of the house. My house. I walked back across the lawn, down the path I had shoveled through winters, swept in the fall, tended every spring. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something close to relief. When I stepped inside the quiet calm of Mrs. Redford's kitchen, she'd agreed to host me for the day. I set the box down and exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. She handed me a cup of tea. "Well," she said, "that was quite the entrance." "I didn't go there to start a war," I replied. "Just to end one." I didn't check my phone. I didn't listen for apologies that wouldn't come. I just sat there sipping my tea as the sun drifted across the kitchen window. 'Cause now everyone knew. The woman they tried to erase? She still had a voice. Do you think the mother made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The house was quiet when I returned. Not the silence of tension or anger, but the kind that feels clean, empty, and earned. Like the moment after a storm when everything's been washed raw. Amanda had taken off somewhere. Daniel hadn't said a word to me since the baby shower. He barely even looked at me when we crossed paths in the hallway. And honestly, I didn't care. That first night back, I stood in the middle of the living room and listened. The walls that once echoed with laughter, arguments, footsteps, and lullabies now held only the sound of the clock ticking above the mantel. But it didn't feel lonely. It felt mine again. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't try to fill the space with music. I just walked slowly from room to room, touching furniture I'd dusted for decades, curtains I'd sewn by hand, and books that still had Daniel's childlike scribbles in the margins. This was my home. Not because of the deed, not because of the paperwork, but because it held every version of me: wife, mother, widow, survivor. I spent the next morning baking. For no one in particular. Just for myself. I hadn't done that in years, made something without thinking of how it would be received, criticized, or ignored. The scent of cinnamon and brown sugar filled the kitchen like it used to when Daniel was little. I even used George's old wooden spoon, the one that's slightly worn on one side from decades of stirring. Felt right. When the bread was in the oven, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a light shawl, watching the neighborhood move around me. Cars passed. Kids on bikes raced down the sidewalk. Birds picked at seeds in the feeder I'd forgotten to refill. It all went on like it always had. But something had shifted. Mrs. Redford came over around noon. She brought her dog, Oliver, and a tin of almond cookies. "I heard," she said gently, sitting down next to me on the swing. "Heard what?" I asked, smiling. "That you turned a baby shower into a court deposition." I chuckled, the first real laugh I'd let out in weeks. "I just told the truth." "Well," she said, "some people find the truth harder to swallow than lemon cake." We sipped tea together, watching the world go by. She patted my hand. "You did the right thing, Marjorie. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." "I'm not sure if it was the right thing," I admitted. "But it was the necessary thing." That night I found myself missing George. Not just his voice or his laugh, but his steadiness. His way of listening without trying to fix everything. His hand resting on mine when I couldn't sleep. I pulled out the old letters he used to write me. Little notes tucked into lunch bags, pockets, and drawers over the years. Most were short. "Breathe. You're stronger than you think. Don't let the world harden your heart. I love your quiet fire." I sat there by the window, reading them by lamplight, the kind of peaceful sadness washing over me that doesn't sting anymore. It just sits beside you like an old friend. The town, as expected, buzzed with gossip. Word spreads fast here, especially when a woman of a certain age walks into a party and turns the whole thing on its head. Some people avoided me. Others gave me quiet nods of respect. One woman from church brought over a pie and said, "I wish I'd had your courage with my brother's kids." But Daniel didn't speak to me. Not once. He moved through the house like a tenant, not a son. There were no more shared meals, no small talk over coffee, no late-night check-ins. I grieved him. Not the man in front of me now, but the boy I had raised. The one who used to cry when I scraped my knee. Who once ran home from school just to give me a dandelion bouquet. He was gone. And maybe deep down he had been gone for a long time. But I also began to notice something else. Peace. Not the loud celebratory kind, but the quiet relief of not waiting anymore. Not waiting for respect or love or change. I started walking again. Around the neighborhood, through the park, past the library. I'd nod to familiar faces, sometimes stop to chat. The fresh air did something to me. Opened windows in my chest that had been shut for too long. One afternoon, while walking past the elementary school, I heard kids laughing. One little girl pointed to a squirrel and squealed with delight. I remembered Daniel at that age. How he once chased a squirrel halfway up a tree and got stuck trying to climb after it. I smiled. And it didn't hurt. The silence in my house was no longer heavy. It became a place of thought, of reflection. I pulled out old recipe cards and started rewriting them. Not for Amanda. Not for Daniel. For myself. And maybe someday someone else. The house still held echoes. George's boots by the door, Daniel's drawings on the fridge, my own voice reading bedtime stories. But now they felt like blessings, not ghosts. And in that silence I found something I hadn't had in a long, long time. Room. Room to breathe. Room to be. Room to begin again. It started with a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. It had been weeks since the confrontation, and the house had settled into a kind of stillness I was learning to love. But there she was, Kelsey, my granddaughter. I hadn't seen her since the baby shower. She stood on the porch in a denim jacket, hands in her pockets, nervous as anything. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, her eyes uncertain. But she smiled when I opened the door. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. "I was hoping, maybe we could talk?" I stepped aside. No hesitation. Of course. We sat in the kitchen, just the two of us. I poured us tea. She didn't touch hers for a while. I'm sorry, she said finally. For what they did. For not saying anything sooner. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You're not responsible for their choices. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. But I saw it. I saw the way they treated you. And I didn't stop it. We sat in silence for a long while, the kind that feels like a bridge being built one board at a time. Then she asked me something I didn't expect. What are you going to do with the house? I blinked. What do you mean? You could sell it. Move somewhere warmer. Somewhere quieter. I smiled. This is quiet. But it's also big. And full of ghosts. I stirred my tea thinking. I've been asking myself the same thing, I admitted. Not about selling. I could never do that. But about what this house could be. What it was meant to be. She tilted her head. And I want to fill it again, I said. But not with people who drain me. With people who need it. Who understand what it means to have nowhere else to go. She sat back. Like who? Veterans. Women starting over. Young mothers with no place to run. The kind of people your grandfather always looked out for. Kelsey lit up. That's actually amazing. We talked for hours. She had ideas, said she could help with outreach, social media, even volunteers. She was studying nonprofit work at university. Something I hadn't even known. I always wanted to do something that mattered, she said. And I think this does. The next day I made calls. I started with the transitional housing program I had included in my will, the one for veterans. A kind voice on the other end listened patiently as I explained my idea. Turning my home into something between a shelter and a sanctuary. Not an institution. A home. We don't have anything like that in this part of town, she said. But we need it. I reached out to Pastor Miller from our old church. He offered to help with donations and volunteers. Mrs. Redford introduced me to a retired carpenter who said he'd fix the guest bathroom for free. It was like the house itself was waking up with me. I cleared out the rooms one by one. Not to erase the past, but to make space for the future. In George's old study, I packed away boxes of papers, keeping only his favorite books and medals. I left his old desk, solid oak, slightly uneven, right where it was. A reminder of the strength that built this place. In Daniel's old room I found action figures, trophies, and a crumpled drawing of us as superheroes. I placed it in a new frame and hung it by the window. Not out of nostalgia, but because even broken stories deserve to be told. The attic was the hardest. Years of memories stacked in boxes. Baby clothes. Love letters. Christmas ornaments. I cried a little. Laughed too. But I didn't stop. I sorted, cleaned, donated. With each bag that left the house, I felt a little lighter. Not empty, just ready. Kelsey came every weekend. Sometimes she brought friends from school. One of them, a soft-spoken girl named Jada, painted a mural in the hallway. A tree with open branches, names carved into the trunk. I asked her what it meant. It's a home, she said. One that keeps growing. The town took notice. An article ran in the local paper. Widow transforms home into refuge for those in need. People started stopping by. A retired nurse dropped off blankets. A teenager offered to mow the lawn. A man who'd served in Iraq brought over extra canned goods and said, "This place feels right." I didn't need applause. I needed purpose. And I had found it. The kitchen, once filled with cold silences and forced conversations, was alive again. The smell of bread and soup filled the air. Laughter returned, not the cruel kind but the kind that heals. I wrote a new note and tacked it to the fridge. This house was built with love. It stays alive through kindness. Welcome home. That night I sat in the rocking chair, tired but whole. I thought of George. Do you see this? I whispered. Your house still stands. And now it gives shelter again. A breeze passed through the open window, rustling the lace curtains. Felt like an answer. I didn't need my old life back. I had built a new one. The first time the new tenants called me Miss Marjorie, I nearly cried. It was Calvin, a quiet man in his late 60s, tall with silver hair and a limp that told of battles fought long ago. He knocked gently on the kitchen door the morning after he moved in and asked if he could help with breakfast. Don't want to be a guest, he said. Feels better being useful. He peeled potatoes and told me stories about his time in the Navy. Not the heroic kind, the human kind. How he once got seasick so badly he had to sleep on deck for 2 days. How his best friend used to hum gospel songs every night before bed. We laughed over scrambled eggs. Felt natural, easy. Like a real family gathering, not the stiff, tension-filled meals I used to endure. By the end of the week, 3 more had moved in. Samantha, a young mother with 2 small kids who had escaped an abusive situation, arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and a stroller. She apologized for the noise before the children even stepped foot in the house. I bent down, looked her in the eye and said, "Children aren't noise. They're music." She cried. We fixed up Daniel's old room for her. The boys, ages 4 and 6, called me Grandma Joe, after mishearing someone say my name. I didn't correct them. Every time they ran into my arms, sticky-fingered and laughing, something inside me healed. This house, which had once echoed with judgment and manipulation, was now filled with life again. Real life. One Saturday morning, I stood at the sink washing dishes when I heard someone playing the piano in the living room. I hadn't heard music in this house for years, not like that. Soft, uncertain notes turning into something warm and familiar. I walked in and found Calvin there, his long fingers hovering over the keys. "Didn't know we still had this," he said, nodding toward the upright piano. "My husband bought it secondhand the year Daniel was born," I told him. "Said he wanted the house to always have a heartbeat." Calvin smiled. "Mind if I keep it going?" "Please do." From that day on, he played every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes hymns, sometimes old jazz standards. Sometimes just notes, no song at all. Just sound. Gentle, imperfect, alive. The neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Redford brought over books for the kids and crossword puzzles for Calvin. The mailman, who once looked at this place like it was fading into ruin, now lingered at the porch to ask how the garden was coming along. We had visitors, volunteers, church friends, even the local high school art teacher who offered to run a weekend class in the garage. And all of them, everyone, called me Miss Marjorie with a softness that carried respect, not pity. Kelsey kept coming. She helped organize, made spreadsheets, even started designing a website for the project. "I want people to know this place exists," she said one day, barefoot on the front steps with a laptop on her knees. "There are too many people out there looking for exactly what you've built." She didn't say much about her parents. I didn't ask. But one afternoon, while planting sunflowers with Samantha and the boys, she looked up and said, "I don't think I ever saw them for who they were." "Not really." I touched her shoulder. "Sometimes we see things too late. What matters is what we do once we finally see." She nodded. "Well, I see you, Grandma. All of you." And that was enough. There were still hard days. The house wasn't perfect. Things broke. Emotions flared. Samantha had nightmares some nights. Calvin sometimes disappeared into his room for hours with the door shut and the radio too loud. But the difference was now when someone hurt they weren't alone. We'd leave food outside the door. Or sit quietly nearby until they were ready. We didn't fix each other. We sat with each other. That was enough. One night I stood at the top of the stairs and listened to the sounds of the house. Not tension. Not silence. But breathing. Laughter from the living room. Pots clinking in the kitchen. A child calling out "Grandma Joe" as they raced down the hall. This wasn't the family I had planned. But it was the family I had now. Real family. Not the kind who shared blood and broke your heart. The kind who showed up. Stayed. Cared. One evening just before sunset, I was sitting on the porch when a car slowed in front of the house. I recognized it immediately, Daniel's. He didn't stop. He just looked. Our eyes met for a second. He looked thinner, older, tired. There was a hesitation in him, like maybe he'd thought about parking. Maybe even thought about coming to the door. But he didn't. He drove on. I watched until the car disappeared down the block. And I didn't cry. Not out of anger. Not even out of pain. Just recognition. Some people make their choices and never look back. Others drive by and wonder what might have been. But I didn't wonder anymore. I had built a new family from the pieces I was given. And we were whole. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and still. The kind of day where the sunlight filters through the windows like memory. I was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when I heard the knock. Not the hurried kind. Not the polite visitor's knock either. A hesitant two-tap knock. Familiar in rhythm. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. Daniel. He stood there in a wrinkled dress shirt, no tie, no jacket. Just him. Thinner than I remembered. Paler too. His eyes darted past me for a moment, as if expecting to be turned away. "Hi, Ma," he said, voice low. My first instinct was to say nothing, to let him speak first. But I stepped aside. "You can come in," I said quietly. He entered like a man walking into a memory. His eyes scanned the hallway, the framed photo of George, the shoes by the door that didn't belong to him, the scent of cinnamon in the air. "I wasn't sure if you'd even open the door," he said. "I almost didn't," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he used to do his homework, where I once served him warm milk after nightmares, where he had left me that manila envelope just weeks ago. He stared down at his hands, fidgeting with a napkin. Amanda left. I nodded once. I wasn't surprised. He glanced at me. "She didn't take the baby. I mean, she's keeping the baby. But she left me." I raised an eyebrow. "And why are you here, Daniel?" "I don't know," he said after a long pause. "I think I just needed to see you." I let the silence stretch. He looked around again, taking in the changes. The warmth. The noise from the hallway as one of the children ran by laughing. Then a soft voice, Samantha's, gently calling them back to the room. "It feels different in here," he said. "It is," I replied. "The house is alive again." He nodded slowly, then looked me in the eye. "I was wrong. It was quiet." I said nothing. "I let her control everything," he went on. "I thought if I stayed quiet it would just smooth over. That eventually things would work themselves out." "They never do," I said. "Not on their own." He nodded. "I guess I thought you'd always be there. That nothing I did could really push you away." "You were right," I said. "I was always there. That was the problem." His face broke just slightly. "I miss you." I studied him, the lines in his face I used to kiss goodnight, the voice that once called me Mama, with joy instead of shame. "I miss who you were," I said. "But I don't miss who you became." He blinked back something, pride, guilt, tears maybe. "Do you think we could fix it?" I thought for a long time. "There's no going back," I said. "Not to what we were. Too much was broken. But that doesn't mean we can't be something new. Someday." He looked down. "I don't deserve that." I sighed. "Maybe not. But neither did I deserve what you and Amanda did." He winced. "I'm not angry anymore, Daniel," I said gently. "But I'm not the woman you left behind either. I've changed." "I can see that," he said. "And I think that's why I came. To see it for myself." I reached for a cup and poured him some tea. Not out of affection. Out of closure. He held the cup in both hands like it grounded him. "Is it true," he asked quietly, "that the house goes to charity now?" "If anyone contests the will," I said. "Yes." He nodded. "Amanda wanted to. After the shower. She said we could fight it. But you didn't." "I couldn't," he whispered. "I just couldn't." I stood and walked toward the window. The backyard was full of life. Samantha hanging clothes, the boys running barefoot, Calvin planting tomatoes. Even Oliver, Mrs. Redford's dog, snoring in the sun. "You had a chance to build something here, Daniel," I said without turning around. "But you chose comfort. Silence. And now this life doesn't belong to you anymore." He got up slowly, walked to the door. Stopped. "Can I visit again?" I turned. "Maybe. But not because you need to feel better about yourself." He nodded, eyes cast down. "Understood." He stepped outside, then paused. "Do you still have the drawing?" "What drawing?" "The one I made. The house with the big sun in the corner." I gave him a long look. "It's framed in the guest hallway." His mouth quirked into a small, sad smile. "That was always your favorite." "No," I said. "You were always my favorite. Until you stopped trying to be." And with that he left. No grand apology. No redemption arc. Just a man who'd lost his place in the home he once called his own. I sat back at the table, lifted my teacup, and stared at the steam curling into the afternoon air. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt peace. Because sometimes the hardest thing in life is not forgiving others. It's forgiving yourself for finally walking away. Would you have let him back in? Let us know in the comments below. The ribbon was yellow. That's what Kelsey chose for the ceremony. Yellow means hope, she said. And homecomings. I didn't argue. The front porch was decorated with potted marigolds, a table of iced tea and cookies, and a handmade sign that read, "Welcome to Marjorie's house. A place for healing." I stood on the porch, back straight, hands folded, watching as the small crowd gathered. Neighbors, church friends, volunteers, a few city officials, and several people I didn't know, men and women who had read about the house in the local paper or heard about it through someone who had once needed a place like this. And right beside me, Calvin, in a clean button-up shirt, medals pinned to his chest. Samantha, holding her boy's hands, smiling like she hadn't smiled in years. Kelsey, clipboard in one hand, beaming like she belonged here because she did. I cleared my throat and stepped forward. "I don't have a long speech," I began. "I've said all the words I needed to say to the people who needed to hear them." Some in the crowd smiled. Others nodded. "But I do want to say this," I continued, my voice stronger than I expected. "This house was built on love, on sacrifice, and yes, on pain. My husband George, God rest him, always said that a home is only as strong as the hearts inside it." I paused. For a while this house was quiet, cold, but now it breathes again. I looked to the children chasing each other on the lawn, to the laughter bubbling from the open windows, to the piano playing faintly in the background, a hymn Calvin had practiced for weeks. "This isn't just a house," I said. "It's a beginning." Then Kelsey handed me the scissors. I looked at her, felt her squeeze my hand, and cut the ribbon clean. Applause broke out. Not wild but warm, like a hug from the whole town. Later, after the crowd dispersed, I walked slowly through the rooms. The ones I'd painted, scrubbed, cried in, fought for. The walls were still the same, but everything else had changed. Daniel didn't show up that day. I didn't expect him to. I wasn't sure if he even knew about the ribbon cutting. Maybe he heard. Maybe he didn't care. It didn't matter anymore. This chapter wasn't his. In the hallway, I passed the framed drawing, the house with the crooked sun in the corner and the words "My Hero" scrawled underneath. I paused, touched the glass, then moved on. In George's old study, the desk had been polished. A young woman sat there now, working on intake forms for new residents. She looked up and smiled. "Miss Marjorie, we got another application today." "Good," I said. "Plenty of room." I stepped out into the backyard where Calvin was showing one of the boys how to tie a proper knot. The garden beds were blooming again, tomatoes, squash, sunflowers. A neighbor had offered to build a small greenhouse. Samantha sat in a lawn chair with a book in her lap and peace in her posture. It wasn't loud or flashy, just safe. I picked a ripe tomato from the vine and bit into it. Sweet, warm from the sun, real. That night, I sat in my rocking chair by the window, just like I had all those months ago. But this time the house wasn't silent. Someone was singing in the kitchen. The boys were giggling down the hall. The old floorboards creaked with footsteps that didn't bring dread, but comfort. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the last letter George had ever written me. I'd read it so many times the paper had softened, but tonight I read it again. "If the house ever feels too quiet, fill it with kindness. If it feels too cold, fill it with purpose. And if it ever breaks your heart, rebuild it. You always were the strongest one." I smiled. He was right. This house had broken my heart. But I had rebuilt it. Not with new furniture or fresh paint, but with people who saw me, needed me, chose me. Real family. Not perfect. Not bound by blood. But bound by something deeper, shared survival. Earned trust. And love that asked for nothing in return. I stood, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle around me. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a light just beginning to rise. Because now this house wasn't just Marjorie's. It belonged to everyone who ever needed a place to begin again. And that was more than I ever dreamed of.